Okay, so we are live from the studio, the home studio. Um, I am going to welcome everybody to our fourth web session. Um, and while we get started, I've got a couple different announcements, so we'll do those. Shawnee, one of our guests, is struggling with her microphone, so we'll give her a little bit of time before we get going. But I wanted to welcome everybody to our session today. If you've logged in, you have meant to join us at our fourth web session. This is meant to be our last one, but it turns out we'll be announcing a fifth one. This one is Ready, Set, Grow, how to hit the ground running upon hearing that you got your commercial license. We understood earlier this week through rumor that it was supposed to already have been announced this week, at least for those for dispensaries. They were not so far at least. This week is still not over. We're only on hump day, so we will see what happens. But we're really excited. We think this is an extremely timely topic. You guys can tell us though, as we get into things. So I just wanted to thank everybody for sharing their midweek with us, and welcome back, Shawnee. I'm excited that you're here, and I'm excited that Mahja, you are here as well. Before we jump into things, just wanted to share our agenda. We have a few announcements. I'm going to do some introduction of our fabulous panel today. We're going to talk a little bit about how you plan for your first steps right out of the gate, a little bit of the difference between building your business and running your business and how that works in terms of managing the project of your life, as I like to call it. And then we're going to go into some hard and fast discussion on the cornerstone of your business, which is your standard operating procedures. And Mahja is going to really help us kind of get into the nitty gritty of your operations. And then Shawnee is going to talk to us a lot about human resources and the work that needs to go on there. So I'll let them introduce their own topics as we get into them. But for starters, we have a few announcements, 3 to be precise. And also, let me just say that as we get into our agenda today, we have a real action-packed agenda. So we're going to really rely on everyone is that you use the chat so that we can be monitoring whether there are questions and make sure to get those answered within the context of the conversation. We're going to go until 4:30 local time, and then after that, if there are still questions, we will stay on to field those questions, but the formal program is done. And anybody who wants to stay on to hear that discussion, that's great, but we just wanted to set sort of those boundaries in terms of time. So thanks again, and here we jump into some things. So I had alluded to a hot topic, number 5, that we were not planning, but we now found out that we are going to be doing. It will be 2 weeks from today, same time, same place actually. And the conversation is strategic funding, how to prepare for that. You'll see here that this is actually a link. This link will link you to what they call green paper. And I'll explain that in a minute, but we'll make sure that you can get a copy of this. So we're going to be joined in 2 weeks by 3 really amazing people. One is Sumit Mehta. He is the CEO and founder of Mazakali, which is a technology investment platform for cannabis. Jessica Velasquez, who is our treasurer at Growmentum Lab, and she also is the founder and CEO of Indiva Accounting and Financial Services in cannabis. She's originally a Chicago native from Little Village, so if she were still living in Chicago, she might actually even be considered an SCA if she had applied. Brandon Banks, also a native of Chicago from Inglewood, is a serial cannabis entrepreneur. He got his start, here, but he moved to Denver early, started tinkering around with growing and got into dispensing, and he now owns operations in several states. And he is part of our extended world. So he will also be on to talk about fundraising from an entrepreneur's perspective as well. So we're really excited to have you. And what our speakers have just asked for is that you come and you bring an open mind to discussion. Okay, and if we can live through my hopefully not barking dogs. That was me quieting my dogs. Okay, second thing we announced this last time, our Grow Apprentice program. It's an apprentice program. If you're thinking about breaking into cannabis, now I know that a lot of people who are here on this call today have already applied or think that they may be getting a license, so it may not be for you, but you may know somebody who wants to break into cannabis. In any of the ancillary spaces, we are working with a lot of ancillary service and product providers. And we've asked a few of these to become partners of ours to deliver this apprentice program. It's a 4-month program, and this is the first time we're doing it, so it's kind of more like a pilot. And there are other opportunities, but two that I would mention at first. There are a construction management company and a security integration company. And if you either don't get your license and would consider this might be an opportunity for you. Also, if you know somebody who are in these spaces or in other kind of ancillary topics, this might be a really great opportunity. We will continue this program once we learn a little bit more from it. So we're really excited about that. And then finally, and we're really excited to announce this, it's been a long time coming, but I think everybody knows that Growmentum Lab, we are a business accelerator in cannabis, specifically here to help and to work with and to promote and to provide opportunities for social equity applicants and entrepreneurs who are in connected businesses, right? Whether they're ancillary, whether they're CBD or hemp industrial related, or anywhere on the entire seed to sale spectrum. Our main objective is to provide these services, provide a 16-week program to you all. And it's a combination of providing seed capital. It's an intensive immersive learning opportunity where you get an MBA light experience, but also cannabis technical training. You get, beyond the 16 weeks, you get a year's full of mentorship. And you're connected to 2 different mentors from 2 different organizations. You get access to a larger capital infusion and a lot of expert networks. To find out more about what would qualify you and how to apply for it, just go to growmentumlab.com. And you go to our programs page and you'll find out more information. I have to definitely do a call out to Mahja because she's been our partner in crime. We've been partners in crime together to get this all done. And we still are, let's say, putting some icing on the cake, but we're getting very, very close to delivery. During the entire month of September, we'll be accepting applications. So feel free to go and check it out and apply, because we're really excited to work with you further. And this should be a really great experience. So with no further ado, I wanted to introduce formally our experts on our panel today. I would say that if you, our conversation is around hitting the ground running, right? If you are thinking you might get a commercial license, you are the leader of your team. What on earth are you going to be doing on day one, especially given that you've got a blank sheet of paper and it's your job to fill it up, give it color, give it life, and really make it happen? How do you get it all done? How do you create and maintain the buy-in from all the different people that you need to get it moving and keep it moving and to meet all the really important critical deadlines? Because if you don't meet them, you may not get to the next phase in terms of what the state is required. So if you haven't asked yourself these questions already, you definitely should have been by now. And hopefully today we can help dispel some of that. So I have asked Mahja and Shawnee to join us here today. Let me just say that I met Shawnee Williams in February at an Illinois Women in Cannabis meeting. And we connected again shortly thereafter. And I was impressed with the full gamut of service offerings in the HR space and education space in cannabis that she and her organization and Illinois Equity Staffing provide. She and her partner, whom I met, are extremely professional, and they are so much fun to work with. Shawnee is so chill. There's nothing that when you talk to Shawnee, like you feel chill too, because she just has that effect on people, unlike my dog who wants to guard my slipper here. So thank you, Shawnee, for joining us today and sharing the light and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate that you're here. And if you have ever been to a Growmentum Lab event before, particularly in the last few months, then you know Mahja Sulemanjee is a cornerstone, a member of Growmentum Lab. I just introduced her slightly by saying that she has everything to do with our curriculum and our mentorship programs that we're really excited to roll out soon. But what you might not know is that she is also a social equity applicant. She is the founder and CEO of High Haven Cannabis, which is, and also a co-founder of Third Eye Blind. High Haven is also an education provider, but also has applied for all of the different license types. And Mahja brings with her over 15 years of experience, 5 of which has specifically been in cannabis. She helped take grassroots from a 2-outlet organization to 60 outlets in grow and in dispense. And so she really knows a lot about the space. Her most recent work with them was in marketing, but she's done a lot of different roles. When you're going from such a small company to such a big company, you only get really specific later. And in the beginning, it's all hands on deck, as everybody will know if you don't already know. So prior to that, she did a lot of work in healthcare. So I just thank both of you guys for being here, and we will just jump right into things if that's okay, unless you guys want to add anything. All right, well, we're going to start out talking a little bit about project management, which just happens to be my formal background. And so I would ask everybody, if you don't already know this, to think about the task at hand that you have coming up as a combination of 2 overall phases. And I think that you can really think a lot about what it's like to build a house. And I'm going to use that metaphor a lot as we talk today, because there's a big difference between building a house and running a household, right? If you're running a household, you've got to think about your family schedule, who's having dinner, who's not having dinner, what you're making, how you're going to get food so that you have dinner, who's cleaning up, what you're going to do, what are the protocols for when someone gets sick, how you're going to keep everything, all the other plates spinning, and how you're going to get the laundry done, and who's going to take the car in when it gets broken, and how everything is going to get done. Are you going to have a budget? When are you going to take your family vacation? Where are you going to go? How much are you going to spend? All that kind of stuff is what goes into running your household. And it's not for the faint of heart. You've got to be thinking about planning. You've got to be thinking about dealing with old spills that haven't been completely cleaned up really well. You've got to be thinking about your day-to-day. You've got to be thinking about your weakest member, your weakest link, and how to really get them to the place where they can operate and go to school or go to work or whatever it is that they do. That's your job if you're running your household. If you have never run a household, sorry for the metaphor, but I think maybe you can kind of take a step back and think about your parents, or think about somebody who was involved in raising you, if you haven't been in that situation, if you've been single mostly lately. This is all very different skills and requirements than if you are actually building your house. If you're building your house, you have to think about how much square footage you have. If you have all the permits that you need to do the building, if you have the right materials, if you have the right trades, are they all coming in at the right time? You can't get your plumber working unless you build a structure, and you can't do your landscaping if you haven't stopped with all of your garbage and your demolition, because you're basically going to just ruin your landscaping if you do it at that point. So what happens is you have to think about the sequencing, and you have to think about who's doing what, and make sure that they're all playing well, because if they're not playing well, they will conflict, and that is going to happen. So I would also say that you don't even use the same skill sets. You don't even, when we think about building, we might think about real estate, but down the line, real estate won't be real estate. It will become managing your facility. So there may be some things that kind of lead into something else, but it's going to look very different one from the other. So the first thing is really think about what tasks you have to do right now and what do you have to do later? And do you know how to think about those things and what kinds of things typically need to happen? We tend to break these things down into lanes or work streams. Fancy project management speak is work streams. I'm going to try to keep it really simple. I've just created 9 here. They are not the end all be all. They're just what we think, the 3 of us think you need to be thinking about. You might wonder, well, why don't I just take someone else's plan? If I know somebody who once owned a dispensary or somebody who once built a house or somebody who once owned a grow, could I use theirs? To an extent, you could. The problem would be you wouldn't really get a lot out of it. Some of the things would be the same, but you wouldn't really benefit from what it means to actually build your own plan and manage your own plan. And that is its own art and its own science. And what we hope to do today is share some tools with you so you can go do this at home and do this yourself so that you don't need to make mistakes of somebody else's plan. So let me give you an example. There are some people here who already are completely financed. We may be suggesting some things here that have to do with building your financial plan, and you don't need those, so those can go away. But if I would use the person who's completely financed work plan, then you wouldn't see anything on work plan, on financing your operation. And that would be an entire big miss that would undermine and destroy anybody's opportunity to get this all done. Because if you're not financed, you're not going to do anything. So there's no 2 projects that look exactly the same. So by starting out with a template and starting out with at a high level and eliminating things as you don't need them anymore, that's great. But starting from the whole gamut and then getting narrower is the way to go here, which is the way I would look at using someone else's plan is create your own. And then once you get it to a place where you can't think of anything anymore, then go look at someone else's to see how you could maybe fill in some of the gaps and realize the places where you're different than they are, because your project is your unique project. So that's part 1. The other thing is a timeline. And when you have a timeline, you've got to really chunk things out and figure out what do you really have to get done now and what do you have to get done later. And do you have to pace yourself? Some of these things are like a marathon and you got to get them started now, even though you know that you're not even going to hit a certain milestone until mile 20. You still want to pace yourself because you're certainly not going to sprint from mile 0 to mile 20. That's not going to happen. You're going to conk out after probably 2 miles at that point at most. So you've got to pace yourself for certain things. So timeline is really important. And so what we would start with is taking your timeline and chunking it out into constraints. And constraints are given to you by someone else, like the law. That's a good place to start in terms of your constraints. An example is that after 180 days, everybody's got to get your real estate figured out. You have to be in a place that wants you, where you've got an agreement, and you can turn around to the state and say, here it is, here's where I'm going to be. That means you've done the negotiation. It means you've gone through zoning. 180 days, typically, and if you were at our second webinar, you learned that real estate typically takes between 3 and 6 months to get through the zoning process. So the state gave you 180 days, which is equivalent to 6 months. So you should get that done, which means you've got a lot of backtracking to do, a lot of milestones to hit that are interim to be able to get you to that one milestone that's been dictated to you. The other is right before you're able to operate, you've got to convert that conditional license, if that's what you've been given with dispensary, you've got to convert that into an actual license, or you're also in trouble of getting shut down. You can't just go ahead and run. You've got to convert that conditional to a permanent. And how do you do that? Well, you have to pay a whole lot of money. And you also have to make sure that there's an inspection that happens. And that on-site inspection is critical as a gating requirement to move to the next phase. So those are 2 outside imposed constraints. You will find that there are other constraints that you need to then kind of put in here. And then all of the other tasks you have to plot have to be done around those constraints with those in mind. What you'll see here are all of those tasks, and they're plotted, and they are not sequential. In fact, They are very, very, very much linear, and they are where you see the linkages between rows. Those are what we call dependencies. So an example could be, and this is really illustrated, part one and part two. Let's say in governance and legal, you've got to create your entity and your operating agreement and all that good stuff that you had to do for the application and apply. And then number two is you get your conditional license. Well, only once you get your conditional license do you really have the ability to go forth in terms of identifying your location if you are a dispensary person. Of course, this is not looking very much like craft grow if that's what you're here for. I recognize that those would be sort of a different set, a different flow. And that's, again, why two projects are not anything the same. But as we all know, that it's somewhere within this process, you've got to come up with a community development plan, and you're going to have a community engagement plan. Your community engagement plan really belongs to your marketing work stream. That's how you're going to interact, and how your touch points to your community is really about how you're reaching out and marketing. Well, that all has to be in place. You have to understand what you're doing and how you're showing up and what your brand is and how you're going to interact with your community. And all of that is going to then go back up and touch your real estate, because that's going to be part of your zoning. You're going to be brought in front of a committee, and you're going to have residents of the community ask you lots of questions. And so anticipating that meeting has got to be part of your work plan. But before that, you've got to do a whole bunch of things to get ready to make sure that you're prepared with what your marketing, what your brand, how you're going to show up, right? And so I'm not going to go through every single one of these points, but it's suffice to say that your job as the CEO is to understand to a reasonable degree what all of these different work streams have to do, when they have to shake hands, when they have to hand off as a baton race versus when they have to work together, how you're going to get everyone to work together, keep everyone moving, make sure nobody winds up in a terrible turmoil, because then there goes your constraints, these really critical deadlines, right? And that's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. Amy, could you talk about like once again, like who's really going to be the person responsible? I know you mentioned the CEO, but like general contractors, project managers, can you just mention a little bit more about that? That might be helpful for the folks.
Okay. So it could really be anybody, but you have to have the skill set to do this. It's the project of your lifetime, and you have too much riding on it. So if you don't have somebody who really understands how to manage a project, I would find someone who does. You're right, Mahja. Real estate companies, construction companies, they are typically GCs. GC stands for general contractor. A GC is really just somebody who's sitting on top of all the trades. So you've got part of it will be your security people, and part of it will be your plumbers, and part of it will be your engineer and your architect, and part of it will be, your electricians and your HVAC people and your landscape people and your interior decorators and all of that. The GC will sit on top of all of that just for your real estate work stream, right? And so you need those same skill sets to sort of oversee all of that. A CEO or COO should have the capability of understanding the intricacies and having enough experience across all of these to bring them together, to keep people motivated, to remove obstacles and move things along. But if you don't have that, perhaps your COO has that. You can hire someone externally to do that. But it's really bringing together all of these things. And it's outside, real estate is part of it, but it is not the entirety of it. Real estate just wants to get the property piece set. And if that's all you're focused on to begin with, then you're not raising enough money, that you're not hiring people to actually be operative in time. And there are plenty of things that you need to do just on your employee work track here to keep it all done. And you won't have the right technology in place for when you actually have to go live. If you're looking at this as solely through the lens of real estate, you are short selling all of the effort that had. This is back to the marathon aspect of it. You will be constantly forever running sprints, and you likely won't get to the end. So just as a high level, as you're in this, I would say that there are some key takeaways. that would summarize everything I just said because there were a lot of points. One is set up your lanes, your key activities, your external constraints, and those interim milestones. Two is plot these things against the dates you'd like them to have and those constraints that are given to you by someone else. Three is reorder these things based on the dependencies. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? If once you decide which way it is, make sure that you update the whole plan accordingly. Four is not at all a hard skill, it's a soft skill, and it's one of the hardest things, which all the different people that you're empowering to lead these, make sure you've got their buy-in on what you've put down there. Did they create the plan? Did you create the plan? Did they and the person in the other work stream that have to shake hands agree that they are going to shake hands? Did they agree on the timeline? Is everyone comfortable with what we've said? And create interim times that you know you're going to check in and see how they're doing. That's called working the plan. Set the expectation about how often you're going to check in with them, and then hold them accountable for those things. And even that could be something that kind of bites you. We've created a list, sort of a 30, 60, 90-day checklist. This is not set in stone, it's suggested. We are thinking mostly about dispensaries here, but it's not necessarily only for dispensaries, maybe just the real estate aspect of this would be. But if you've got 120 days to work with, until you get to a really big milestone, you've got certain things you've got to think about. And these, again, are not set in stone. But what you'll notice is that in 30 days, you see that this list shrinks. That's not because the list actually shrinks. It's just because it's really hard for me to know with exact precision today what exactly in 120 days I need to deliver. And so a plan is something that's constantly evolving, and you've got to manage it and be on top of it and eliminate things that you've passed and continue to update and add new things to it. It's just like a glorified, complicated checklist is what it is. But what you need to do in the next 30 days is going to be much, much bigger. And as you cross those things off, the list for 60 days is going to get bigger, but that's going to become your next 30 days, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to go into each of these. These will be online, just like all of our previous presentations have been online. You'll be able to utilize these, and we have other tools baked in here as well.
Really quick, Amy, I have a question. Do
Sure.
people really have just 30 days to get all of this stuff done? Like, what does that really look like?
It's great, great, great. Well, the truth is, great question. A lot of these things you really should have been doing until now. A lot of these things you would be like, oh yeah, I established my entity. I had to do the application. I know where I want to be. So in a way, you've identified it, and you don't know that the zoning is done, but you're on the path, and that's great. You may already know what general contractor you want to work with. You may already know what marketing partner you want to work with. A lot of people have already applied for the no interest loan. That's another thing we'll bake into here, the link to getting that no interest loan. I would highly, highly, highly recommend getting that, because you need some cash in your pocket immediately to get a lot of stuff done. And that's a great opportunity for anybody who qualifies as a social equity. If you don't know everyone on your executive team because you've identified a gap, and that's, by the way, something that Mahja and I talked about in our last session. If you haven't identified any gaps, please speak to us, because we can help you identify those gaps. There's an assessment that has been created that will help you with that. You may not have gotten all these things done, but you should probably have been pretty far down the path of getting a lot of these things done. And if you are not far down the path of getting these things done, yeah, you got to get them done in the next 30 days. Because if you don't get these things done in the next 30 days, it's going to put you behind the 8 ball for everything, all the rest of the intervals here. All right. So again, I'm going to ask everybody else other than the speakers to just put your questions in chat, and we'll get to them at the end. But we're going to keep things moving because we have, like I said, a really, really huge agenda. So the next part of operations, as you get into your operation yourself, you're going to have to be thinking about your SOPs. And that can be daunting. So I'm going to hand it over to Mahja, who has built these kinds of SOPs for years in the roles that she's been in, and she knows cannabis. So thank you, Mahja.
Of course. Thanks, Amy. So the SOPs are known as standard operating procedures, but sometimes that's a very industry specific term, mostly for manufacturers and different things like that. So it's now, of course, something that cannabis needs to get pretty proficient at doing. And what I've seen in most verticals, you'll see, upwards of 300 to almost 400 different SOPs, depending on how determined you are to use that as a strategy, whether it's used for documenting procedures or whether it's used for training or onboarding, or any of those things. And typically when SOPs are created, you want to keep those types of things in mind. How are you planning to utilize the SOP? Is it specifically just for documenting and for inspection purposes, or are you planning on also using it for training? And so those are some important things to kind of consider as you go through this. But these are all departments will need something like this. So whether it's security or whether it's just your dispensing organization, and anything in between. So HR will have them, and anything from a specific thing. We'll have an example here towards the end of a couple of these slides, but you can utilize really an SOP for anything you want to create a procedure for. So I know Amy and I and Shawnee had talked about this earlier in the week, and we talked even about, there's onboarding SOPs all the time. People say, okay, this is how we want to onboard, but just as important maybe to think about, how do you offboard somebody? What does that SOP look like? And how important is it to do an exit interview, and what exactly do you want it to look like? So those things are relatively important, but you can go through the entire cannabis vertical, and if you've applied for all of them, or whether you are awarded one versus all of them, you just go through and pick out specifically what is it that you want to accomplish, and you start thinking about what's going to affect every single part of the business. So Amy, if you go down to the next slide, I can go through
I have
really
a question on this one. Is an SOP really is it a suggestion to do? Like, do you have to do, like, what do you have to do them? Or is it really just a good idea?
That's a great question. I mean, it goes beyond being a good idea, right? I think it definitely is something that's needed. But the thing about the cannabis companies that happens relatively quickly is they grow fast. And in the past, it's because, other states opened up, and a small company who's Illinois based now becomes a multi-state operator. And when you're dealing with going from, 20 employees to possibly 300 employees, 400 employees, 500 employees within one short year, it becomes a process that you have to really understand. And the best way to do this is to document them and to use them. So, with technology and things like that coming about now, people are utilizing software to get this done, right? A little app, you go in and you look at your SOP. If I'm watering plants, I forgot it's my 6th day on the job, I can't remember what they told me, I can go right into an app, and figure out, oh, okay, this is how you water the plants. Perfect. Now I know, because everybody in the company follows the same process. So I think that it becomes more than a suggestion. It becomes a living, breathing document that, we'll talk about it a little bit, but that you're going to update regularly. You're going to have reviewers go through it regularly. You're going to, as you change one function of your business, it might affect 3 others or 4 others. And you want to really make sure that you have a tight, stringent process for this. We'll talk about the anatomy a little bit more.
Got it. So then, one thing that I've learned in some of the highly regulated businesses is that if you don't have an SOP, a regulator can come in and actually close you down and say, well, of course, everyone's doing this differently. They don't have one standard. And so if you don't, it's a risk mitigating measure so that you get in trouble later.
Absolutely. I mean, inspections at a dispensing organization and cultivation happen regularly, monthly. So a lot of that happens to, help with the inspector who's coming in to to really go through whatever the processes are. They're going to follow you around. They're going to follow the manager around a little bit. They're going to ask certain questions. They're going to ask for documentation. And, you know, when they look back and, you know, we'll use waste management as an example because we'll go through that later. But when they talk about, when they say, okay, well, let me see your waste management log, what does that look like? And if you say, well, here's our log, and they say, well, I don't know if this is really working, but you say, well, these are SOPs that back up, this is how we do it. And this is where in the law we find it. And you know, we really have a great way to combat that, because a lot of the times what happens with state inspectors is that, you know, they have one way of determining what the law says, and their interpretation could look a little bit different than when it's actually put into place and you actually have to do it. This is the difference between educated and actually operating. So it becomes a really important piece of it. But I would say that's important to back it up and have these SOPs and share them with people outside of your agency who are coming in to do inspections. You taking us to the next slide, Amy?
I did. Did it not turn for you?
Okay, it'll just be, I'm sure, just a couple of seconds.
It's not sticking on my instance. I'm sorry.
Well, you're totally fine. I think I have it open. If I just go from full screen to not full screen. All right, so I have it open somewhere else so we can easily go through it. So anatomy of the SOP, essentially, you know, you're looking at a couple of different things. You're looking at, oh, there we go. Okay. You're looking at procedure. So this is the main thing. What is the procedure of the entire waste, you know, of going through a damaged item? What do you do with it? And it could be any topic, hiring or whatnot, but really if we just use waste management for an example, what is the whole process of it? How do you plan to accomplish this? And you know, what is it going to look like step by step? So the department that it belongs to is something that's important to make sure that that department is regularly looking through it and understanding if any processes change or anything else that's changed is affecting this. It could be as simple as the day of time that you're doing it or the frequency or any of those other things. Effective date becomes really important because if you're awarded licenses in, you know, September of 2020 and your first draft goes into effect, say 4 months later or 3 months later, by the time you're actually operating, you'll probably have a revision. And at that time, you'll have another effective date, or, you know, you'll be able to go back and say, okay, how many times have we reviewed this at least? The originator and an approver becomes really important. So who's actually writing the SOP, and then who on the team or within that department is going through the SOP to make sure this is actually what's being followed and that it's approved. So really just double backing it and making sure that the process is what it's supposed to be. And then importantly enough, the purpose of it. So why is this so important, right? What is the purpose of this entire process? Just a small explanation is more than enough, and that might change with time, and it might be multiple purposes that a person is using a specific SOP for. Responsibilities, it's again almost like a you know, what exactly are the responsibilities for this particular piece? And it could be as simple as something like, you know, taking a damaged product and disposing of it and accounting for it. Frequency is really important because, you know, when we talked about watering plants, and maybe if we think about it in the waste management process, you know, maybe this is something that happens once a week, or maybe this is something that happens twice a week. So that's something to keep. Again, on the SOP, it makes sense to really let the person know, not only is this the procedure, these are the departments, this is the effective date, these are the people who've originated from it and approved it. So if you have questions, you know who kind of to go to. And then the purpose, responsibilities, and then this is how many times you need to do this per week. And then again, the procedure there step by step. So, so it becomes really important to kind of go into a paragraph narrative of saying, okay, this is the first thing you do. This is the second thing you do. Record the time, take out the binder that you put it in, and take your mixing medium, destroy the plant, have it, you know, live time with the state so that they can see that this is what you're doing, and you log it around the same time. And so take them through step by step of the process. And then the duration of the procedure, you know, typically, you know, in waste management, this might not be as effective, but if you're thinking about watering watering plants. If you're doing this once a day or however often you're doing this, how long do you water those plants for? Is it 30 seconds? Is it at 2 hours? Just those types of things to kind of really spell out every single piece of that process makes sense. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question if that's
Go
okay.
ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
How, who is the person who should be writing these? Like, is it the person in the department? Like, should it be the head of the department? How does that happen?
Sure. So I think that there's a couple of different ways to do this, right? Because in the cannabis space, the CEO typically doesn't know, isn't the master grower, right? Isn't the person who's doing the same job. They understand the function of it, they know the importance of it, and they have the responsibility to engage with that person to get what they want, but they might not really know. So I typically find to go right to that subject matter expert, the person who is doing this day to day. It could be the person in charge of the entire department, but it could be somebody like instead of the facility director, it might be the grower. So even though the facility director might be the person in charge of the entire facility, it could be the grower, or it could be even the grower's apprentice, right? Whoever is really building that process for them. So and the reason that we have the originator and then the approver is typically once those SOPs are written out, somebody else is going to take it into format and really make sure that it's compliant. So compliance comes into place. You might have your, your CCO or your compliance person going through this, and they would then say, okay, here's the process. We're the ones who are going to approve it from a compliance department.
And Mahja, how often would you suggest an organization should review and revise their SOPs?
Absolutely. So I think that in the application, this was mentioned, and I don't know if, it was like a write out question within the application, which I don't think it was, but when you go through and you decipher, like, what is your plan as far as a cultivation or dispensing organization? How are you planning on keeping compliance within your facility? I recommend usually going through it quarterly. Some people are going to find that they're, every month, especially when you first start, things are going to change from what it was on Wednesday. Now it's Friday, and it's completely different on Friday than it was on Wednesday. And when you come back on Monday, they're like, oh, great, with that, we're fine. We're going to go back to how we did it on Wednesday. So just staying nimble and on your toes in the first few years, how it's been in the past, but now that the industry is getting a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more standardized, it might be a little bit more more structure given to some of this process. But I would say quarterly, plan on doing compliance and going through your SOPs, having each department head report to say, yes, we did inventory this way, but we found, X, Y, and Z were the issues. So we changed the entire procedure. So now that that's done, how do we retrain it? Who's the training, whoever's training on your team, who's going back to make sure that that's taken care of? Who's then, it's usually going to be the manager of the facility at that time, and how are they really executing that change? So all of those things become pretty important, but I would say a good quarterly check won't hurt. That does get to be quite a bit as you become more mature in the space, because quarterly there's millions of other things you're doing. As you grow, as you're managing human capital, that's just really one of the day-to-day rigors of having to manage people. So I would say that if you can get away with it twice a year after a point, that's great, but I don't see any less than that.
Well, the other thing is that over time, people take shortcuts and things change. And if you don't go back and look at it, it's like you wake up and a year later you look at this and it doesn't even resemble what your work is. And then if you do get in trouble or a regulator does come in and they see a discrepancy between what you've written and what you do, then they're going to start to question every part of your operation, and they're going to look for stuff because they know that you're lax, and then there's probably a lot of other issues because you're just not that disciplined. So you're actually asking for trouble if you allow it to go too long.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. I think that these are legitimate documents that are going to help you run your day-to-day operations, and they're your blueprint for what you handle and how you do things. You can, have one for hiring, have one for firing. You can have one for, even how what you want your opening days to look like at your dispensaries. If you're opening 10, 20, 30 dispensaries, at some point you might want to have an SOP for this is how we open every single store, and this is the process. So
yeah, awesome.
And I think the last slide, Amy, is just or this last, my slide is just a opportunity to go through and just see kind of what the organization of this might look like. So again, the procedure right at the top, and effective date and what department it might belong to, some originator and approver information there, what version you're on, the purpose again, and then the step-by-step procedure, breaking it down for really what you want to do. And again, we just used a waste management type of an example. And I highlighted the word plastic there because you might not want to use plastic in today's green world. I would recommend you try not to, but of course that's up to every company, however they decide to do it. But I thought this would give just a good example of what that might look like. I also like the fact that on the very bottom you'll see references or related documents, and you place this typically in the index, right? You could put a little area that says this is where in the law this is where it states. So if you fall into compliance issues with inspectors, you can say, well, it's right here in the Tax Act on such and such section.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This is great. And I do, this is a really good example of what people need to be thinking about. And maybe they don't do all of them right to begin with, but some high level ones. And then over time, back to the marathon thing.
Absolutely.
All right, Shawnee, bring us home, please, and tell us a little bit about how to think about human resources over this period of time. Because again, not a last minute thing you can think about, right?
Absolutely. I'm going to take you guys through a deep dive example. And I really just want to preface this by saying that I'm very, very passionate about human resources. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the cannabis industry to take advantage of what we're lacking in human resources right now as an industry. It's really hard to have a great company culture, and it's hard to maintain a great company culture, but it's going to be up to the executive team and the principal officers to really be that example and to make sure that the company is what it's supposed to be or what you wrote it down to be on paper. So obviously we've been chopping it up about processes and constraints and dependencies, and then we've hopped into SOPs, but I really want to narrow into really one work stream, and that's going to be human resources for you guys. It can be daunting really for anyone, especially when you're starting to ramp up your team. And just so you guys know, human resources is going to include your recruiting, your workplace health and safety, employee relations, compensation and benefits, labor law, and training and development. So all of those different things are going to be under the Department of Human Resources for your company. For this section of the presentation, I just really want to go over 30, 60, 90, 120. What does that look like once you receive that conditional license? So within the first 30 days of receiving your conditional license, you want to review your staffing plan. I know that sounds hilarious, but a lot of applicants, I'm sorry, I didn't apply, but a lot of applicants, worked with consultants, worked with people who wrote their application for them. And so when it gets down to the nitty gritty, you want to make sure that whatever you and your consultants wrote in your application, you actually do it. So your staffing plan, your training planning, your employment practices, you want to review that before you do anything. Determine what your internal team can and cannot handle and outsource what you can. And I think Mahja and Amy may have already talked about this in another presentation. So determine what you guys can handle in-house and then figure out where your gaps are, hire those people or outsource it for contractors or consultants.
Hey, Shawnee, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Or actually a point about what you said. I wanted to underscore something.
Yeah.
There is actually a real problem if what you committed to in your application is not what you ultimately decide to do. And that is not only about human resources, but thank you for calling that out. That is for everything. If you decided that you were going to be doing something with your space that because of the space you wind up in, you can't do, or you want to hire a certain kind of person, or you want to staff 20 people, but in the end of the day, you only really need 10, whatever it is, any deviation from your application, you need to disclose to the state. Because if you do not disclose it, the state will assume you're pulling the wool over their eyes. You're pulling the wool over their eyes means there's more to investigate. And once again, you are threatened being shut down. So thank you so much, Shawnee, for mentioning the whole idea of go through your application, because if you are not completely aware of everything you put in and you don't deliver it to the letter of the application, you will be it'll be really hard for you to come back. And then all these best made plans will go to the side because you'll be scrambling after an audit and after trying to prove yourself, and you won't get your stuff done.
Absolutely. And it's not to knock anyone who use consultants. I mean, really, we can't know everything. Your team won't know everything. Even moving forward, once you get a license, you're not going to be able to handle everything. And so if that's no knock to any team that did outsource, outsourcing is really what's going to make or break a team, being able to have strategic partners and divvy up the work, to be completely honest. It's just being cognizant of what you put in the application, moving forward and actually doing what you said you were going to do. That's really what it comes down to. And so remember, when you're working on human resources, you're also going to be handling, like they've already said, construction, zoning, branding, vendors, supply, and preparing for your inspection so that you can open your doors. So one of the things you want to focus on as a team, and you might want to just assign it to one person, is your job descriptions for those positions that are going to probably be immediately available around the time you're going to open your doors. So if you're a dispensary, we're talking dispensary agent in charge, someone who may be doing security, and then a few agents, right? You want to have those job descriptions figured out. If you have some higher level positions that you still need to fill, you'll also want to come up with those job descriptions as well. Then you are going to want to start putting together your SOPs, your human resources SOPs. And so within SOPs, there are some checklists. And so we're going to go over a few checklists, onboarding and offboarding. But onboarding is one checklist that I think is very, very important. Let me just put it really simply to you guys. When an employee gets hired and they start their first week, actually, when they get their offer letter, from that point on, that will determine whether or not they stick with you. Their loyalty, how happy they are, their morale, all of that. All of that is determined by how you handle your new hire onboarding checklist, believe it or not. It's super important, and I think we overlook it a lot. Really large corporations do onboarding really well. Really small corporations or really small teams don't necessarily do it well because they probably don't know how important it is. But trust me when I say, and I think I may have a few statistics, but later on, but it's very important. Then after you kind of have thought through what onboarding is going to look like, you also want to look at what training and development looks like. What does that look like for your team when they come on board, they sign their paperwork, they enroll in benefits, they get the tour? What does training look like? Do you actually develop your team? If you do, what is that? What does that look like? Is that conferences? Is that expos? Is that you having in-house training, an actual training coordinator on the team? Do you have someone on the team who can actually do that? If not, are you going to be able to find someone in time to do that for you? These are things you want to talk about. Now, 60 days out, that's when you really want to start thinking about sourcing and doing some interviews, probably for your higher level positions, so management, supervisory roles. And one question that Amy had for me when we were going over this presentation is, well, do they start training right away? When you think about HR, you guys think of it as waves, right? So when you have new hires come on, you want to make sure their experience is the same as every single new hire that comes before them or after them. So their training within reason is going to need to start within the first, or their new hire orientation needs to start within the first week or two of them starting, because you want to make sure everyone has the same uniform experience. So if you have some supervisors or some managerial roles that start, you do want to start your onboarding and your new hire training as soon as possible. Within 90 days, you'll probably be doing some more sourcing and interviews, maybe for some more specialized roles, maybe some security. It really depends. Also, when you're thinking about contracting some folks, you may not necessarily, so there may be some folks you contract, and your team will go back and forth. Should we contract this, or should we have this person in-house? That will be based on what your team decides, but that will also determine whether or not they're an employee or they're a contractor. So some of those roles that are more specialized, they may be contractors. It just really depends, but they may also be an employee. So you're around 90 days. Those are the type of roles that you will want to try and source for, or at least start getting your feelers out there in your network to find candidates for those roles. And then you want to do another wave of orientation and training. Within 120 days, you really want to think with your team, what can you guys be focusing on? With the people that have already been hired, what can you focus on as a team to divide and conquer? So whether that be, planning the presentation for community meetings, scheduling social media posts, planning community events, engaging your strategic partners and your vendors, what can the employees that have been hired, what can they be doing to kind of take the load off of the principal officers? So that's what that really looks like. When we get to 160, 180 days, you're probably looking at obviously hiring some of your entry-level folks, your agents and whatnot. But that's kind of just, like I said, a high-level overview. We didn't include everything, but we want to kind of give you guys just a feel for what that HR process looks like. You can go to the next slide, Amy. Now we're going to kind of drill down into one specific task within the list of HR work streams, and that's going to be onboarding. So many entrepreneurs overlook the importance of onboarding. I've already said that. Now, it should be viewed as an SOP. Why? Because all employees should be introduced to the company as the same. Your brand and your internal processes should be communicated to each new hire in the exact same way every time. So if you have someone that comes on board and they get a t-shirt, everyone should get a t-shirt on their first day. Like, it should be the same process. Were you going to ask something, Amy?
Yeah, why? Why should you keep saying that, but like, what's the value of being so
the same? So, when Mahja talked about, I think she may have talked about this in a private meeting with us, but one thing Mahja said is when you go to McDonald's or you go to Burger King, you go to the drive-thru, your process is going to be the same no matter what Burger King or McDonald's you go to in the country, right? That should be the same internally. Your brand externally is just as important as your brand internally. So when an employee comes on, there should be an expectation for everyone, for the HR department, for that person's supervisor, for whoever's going to be assigned as their peer reviewer. All of those people should have the expectation. We want to make sure that this is the greatest first week that this person has had. We want to make sure that we make the greatest first impression that we can, because at the end of the day, this is going to affect really like I said, your morale. This is going to affect your productivity. This is going to affect your employee brand, and it's going to affect your retention at the end of the day. So your job is to make sure the employee feels like they're part of something great from day one, not day 50. It should be great from day one. And it's really up to the team to do that. I've been on teams, and I've worked for corporate America for a long time. I've been on teams like Cisco Systems, Meraki, and there's a process. Like you come to your desk your first day and it's all decorated, your team's decorated. Everyone has their role in the organization, and it really makes someone feel special to be a part of the team. So that's really why. You can click on that link if you want, Amy. I just want to really kind of go over a few things. That Amy will kind of give you guys a link to this template. It's a very, very simple onboarding template, but you'll see it's an Excel. It's really an Excel file. So it's separated by manager, HR, coordinator, office administrator, technology, and peer reviewer. So upon hire, obviously the manager is going to create the person's schedule, right? They're going to identify the person, the point of contact from the HR department that this person will contact with or make contact with for HR things, benefits, whatnot, W-4, I-9. And then the office administrator, or whoever does that work, the coordinator, will submit all of the IT requests that person may have. This might be different. If you're a higher level person, you may have a ton of IT requests. If you're entry level, you may not have any IT requests. It really depends. Prior to the start date, this person is going to, if they have an office, they're going to have their the designated office space. The office administrator will be responsible for that. Human resources will confirm receipt of all recruitment documents, confirm background check. These are things that need to be done so that when the first day they come, they're being welcomed. They're going to be given a tour. They're going to be guided to wherever their workstation is. They may even have a lunch with either their supervisor or one of their peers. You know, they may even touch bases with HR to complete some more paperwork in person. They may go over benefits. It depends if benefits are active, you know, that day. It depends. And then, like, you know, HR will, or whoever is responsible for badging, all of that stuff will come within the first week or so. And then you have the first 30 days, the first 90 days. What does that look like? Are there performance reviews that's expected? And this person will also get their, probably a timeline of their own so they can keep track. They know what's coming. Expectations have been set on both sides. But these are the types of things that these types of checklists work with SOPs to make sure that the process internally is uniform across the board for everyone. So we're gonna talk about offboarding. Simply put, offboarding is a process that leads to a formal separation between an employee and an employer. And why is it important? It mitigates really security and legal threats, and it allows the employer to gather information on ways to improve their internal processes. I can't tell you how important it is to really understand why an employee, if they are leaving, if they're resigning, why they're resigning. Because you may have a company culture thing that you don't even know is going on. And in order to address that, you have to create a safe space for these people to have this conversation with human resources. So on the presentation that you guys will obviously have access to after, you'll have a link to a sample offboarding checklist. You know, for paperwork and HR purposes, they'll want to know when their last paycheck date is. They want to know all of their 401k information because that does carry over. They'll want to know health insurance information, COBRA, all that good stuff, non-compete agreements and NDAs if that's required. They'll want to know if any PTO will be paid out on their paycheck, and then any outstanding reimbursements. Now, for the knowledge transfer, which is the next part of the checklist, you'll want to kind of go over locations of certain documents that they've owned. So if there's any documents or anything, any tasks, anything that employee owned during their time at the organization, you'll want to make sure that knowledge transfer happens before they leave. And so that could be with the supervisor, or that could be with the HR department. It really depends. You want to have an exit interview, and you really want to ask them, really, obviously everyone should get the same questions, but some questions that you should consider are, what did you like most and least about your job? Were your goals and expectations clear? Did you think about the job? Do you think your job description matches these expectations? Would you change your job description? Talk about your managers. What did they do well? What could they improve on? Did you receive enough feedback on your job, and did that feedback help? Did you have all the resources necessary to do your job and do it well? Did you feel you had room to grow? Would you work here again? And would you recommend this company or this position to a friend? Why or why not? Those are really tough conversations to have, but it will create an iteration or a process of iteration that will allow the organization to do better next time around. I can really tell a great organization from a terrible organization based on whether or not there's an exit interview and whether or not HR actually cares to take notes during the exit interview. That's all I'm going to say. The last parts are recovering assets. So if there is any assets that need to be recovered, like laptops, cell phone, badges, company credit cards, things like that. And then the final housekeeping is really internal for the company, updating passwords, removing them from the payroll, updating their organizational chart if they are higher level, redirecting their phone calls, redirecting their emails, things like that. And that's, I know that was a lot, but those are some checklists that you guys want to pair up with SOPs within the human resources department. And this goes across the board. This was just human resources, but this really goes for a lot of different departments within an organization.
And it's a great example because these kind of tools are used everywhere, both SOPs and the corollary worksheets and checklists and logs that kind of get described in the SOPs, right?
Absolutely.
So like one of the things, thank you, Shawnee, this is fantastic. Well, I mean, hopefully everybody's like able to take away, because I know that we're right up at the end of the hour here, is that there is just a ton of detail that if you do not have a plan and you're not managing the plan, you're never going to get to all this detail because you're going to miss it all. And guess what? This is what keeps your leaders in business, your business in business. You can't do this without it because it is a highly regulated industry. And that's not just, the highly regulated industry is not just a matter of, oh, it was really a pain in the butt to apply. It was from the minute you even heard about it to the minute you either sell it or close shop. Every minute of that time is going to be in the world of dealing with the government and to this level of detail. So hopefully this isn't the first you've heard of it. If it is the first you've heard of it, you've heard a very thorough, both broad and deep version of what it looks like. You know, we're around to answer questions and to help you as you organize going forward. And I'll just ask if Shawnee or Mahja, if either of you have any like parting comments, and we'll just like kind of stay on.
Let's go, Danny.
I mean, I would say my parting comment is hopefully it was helpful and not overwhelming. I kind of find that like certain topics that have to do with operations and human resources tend to be overwhelming. But I hope that the presentation really provided more of an eye-opening experience to what's to come next, instead of being overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, as Amy mentioned before, like this is the project of a lifetime, right? And especially to date, considering it didn't exist before a few years ago here in Illinois. But, you know, with that being said, use the people and the resources around you that understand the space and are there to help. You know, subject matter experts know this stuff detailed. They understand it. They've lived through it. They, you know, and for some of us who are newer to this in the Illinois market, it's a great opportunity for us to use those resources. So talk to people who understand it and subject matter experts like Shawnee within, you know, with HR and with other groups, and just use your resources around you wisely. Growmentum is a great avenue for that. I know for application writing, it was a big help to a lot of people. And I think that that's the rhyme here, right? You don't have to know everything yourself, but you certainly have to know somebody who knows how to do it and lean on them for support. That should take you the whole 9 yards. Oh, you're on mute, Amy.
Here, I'm talking into mute. Thank you. Well, let's just hang out here for just a minute, see who's got any other questions. I'm gonna look at chat. Doesn't have anything in it right now, and neither does Q&A, but we will just sort of hang. You can hear my daughter play in the background. I'll continue to mute so you don't have to hear her or the dogs. And thanks everybody for giving us a slice of your time on a Wednesday afternoon. Hopefully see a lot of people in 2 weeks on the topic of building your financial stack. Yeah, I'm definitely not seeing that there are any questions, so let's.
I was gonna say, I was trying to see if I recognize some names. I see Keyston and Adrani on here. Hi guys. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Adrani. I don't know if that was you who said that, but Indrani, it looks to me like you asked the question if you can get a copy of the recording and the series. Yes, all of the recordings so far are on our website, if you go into the program section, you can see the web series, you could see each one of them. And you'll have everything. You'll have each recording, the presentation that was given, links to documents or checklists or whatever it was, including articles. Like for the next one, there's an article that can help out. So for sure.
Okay, let's go. Danny.
And let's see. And that's the only question we got.
Dan.
There's another one. Oh yeah, okay. Sure, no problem, Indrani. No problem. Thank you. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I think it's a wrap. Have a great week. Feel free to reach out, or 2 weeks until the next time. Feel free to reach out to any of us in the meanwhile. And thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.